Kit bloat is a term you may have heard thrown around recently, especially with the addition of a bunch of new Overwatch 2 heroes, including Hazard, who is kind of what's sparking this video and this discussion. So basically, what is kit bloat? So kit bloat refers to a character having a lot of mechanics or ability in their kit compared to the original characters, right? So it's part of the kind of power creep discussion as new characters are introduced to keep them more interesting. They kind of have more things to do, and it leaves the other characters in the dust. And sometimes it leaves, again, it just leaves other characters behind where they have really simple kits. Other times it kind of introduces things to those characters' kits to keep up. And then overall, characters have more things that they're able to do and more mechanics possible as well. And that's kind of where this kit bloat happened. Now, I will be talking about Hazard, but I will come to Hazard in the end. But really what I want to talk about in this video is look at a couple examples of characters that have kit bloat, some that the community has talked about and has voiced concerns about, others that I think maybe not so much. In fact, maybe some people don't even consider them to have kit bloat, but when you kind of compare them all together, they actually kind of do in different ways. And I also want to see, is kit bloat a bad thing? Is it healthy in some regards, right? Because I actually do think that there's a world where it's not a bad thing for this kit bloat to happen, right? I think there are unhealthy versions of it, and we're going to get into that. So to start this out, let's talk about Brig. Now, Brig right now is not what I'm talking about, right? We are obviously going to talk about launch Brig, right? If you list up all the things that Brig could do at launch, she had a stun, she had a knockback, she had armor that she had to give to herself, and she gives to her allies in multiple ways. She had AoE sustain and healing, and she had burst sustain or burst healing as well. She had all of that she could do basically at the same time and all the time, right? So whip shots on a short cooldown, bash is on a relatively short cooldown, armor packs she can throw 3 out at a time because she can store them. You can hit people in that time, of course, and get the inspire up, right? It's everything kind of stacking on itself. So not only does Brig have so many mechanics, so many solutions, right? She's got the knockback, she's got the stun, she's got the sustain, she's got all of that. She does it all at once. There's really no thought behind it. Brig was just an extremely powerful character without many downsides at all. And she was a jack of all trades, literally no weaknesses. And of course she had mitigation too. She had her 200 or 650 health shield or whatever it was, 600 health. Just crazy stuff. And I want to start with that Brig because I think it is, and still to this day, the most egregious example of kit bloat, right? And it has taken years and multiple video games to get Brig down to a point where that is no longer the case, right? So her burst has been toned way down. She doesn't give armor to allies. She doesn't even have a stun anymore. Stuff like that, right? And of course her rally has been reworked, but she doesn't give armor to other characters. Now she only gives overhealth, which is objectively worse than armor, of course. So Brig has gotten to a point where, of course, if you've seen my In Defense of Brig video, you know that I actually think that Brig is pretty well designed, especially in this current iteration. But she's gotten to a point where she said, I'm reading chat, sorry, where she has got, her kit bloat has come down, right? It is not that much of a problem anymore. Because she doesn't have as many things to do, right? She still has the problem of she uses whip shot or she just bashes or whatever, and she always gets her sustain. And there's a couple easy things that she can do, right? But since Brig has launched, her kit has come way down. She's gotten a lot of stuff removed, right? So launch Brig, I think, is it's the best example of a character that really suffered from what we call kit bloat. And I think that's a bad example, right? She does so many things all at the same time, no risk to her. I don't think there is any one character in Overwatch now, or even really in Overwatch 2 at all, that were like this, right? And we are going to talk about Overwatch 2 characters because that is where most of the criticism is coming from, right? It's coming from the new characters that have launched. I'm not going to hit on every character. I don't think every character has this. I think like Weaver, Ilyari is very simple. You know, she's just a DPS, basically. I don't think Venture really has that much. Juno, I don't think is bloated. I don't think she has that many mechanics. She's just kind of overtuned. But there are a couple characters that we should talk about. So let's talk about another character who launched with a lot of stuff and actually has gotten it toned down over time to a point where her playstyle has shifted, but also her kit, again, lost stuff. She is no longer bloated. We are going to talk about Sojourn. And an important thing we do need to talk about is that I'm going to talk about mechanics, but I'm going to keep that definition a little broad. So like anything that pierces a barrier, anything that's a one-shot, you know, mobility in general, those aren't mechanics per se, but they kind of prove the point, right? Just high burst damage versus one-shot capability potential. Those are definitely two different things, and one of them is much more valuable than the other. So that's kind of where that is coming from if you're confused about why I'm saying like, oh, one-shot is a mechanic. Not in the same sense as like an anti-nade, right? So Sojourn's Sojourn's initial iteration definitely had way too much going on, right? You had the one-shot, you have super high mobility. You may not remember this, her grenade slowed people as well, right? So she had soft CC, she had one shot, she had high mobility, super high burst, and yeah, I mean, like, she didn't have as much as Brig, but for a DPS character, especially in a game that is trying to eliminate as much like friction and CC as possible, Sojourn was definitely a standout, right? And I think also what's really the big difference maker is that Soj had a very consistent one shot, right? It wasn't just consistent one shot, she had consistent damage on top of that with her railgun as well. So there weren't even really downsides to it, right? She had consistent damage on top of the one shot, so even when she wasn't doing a one shot, she was doing a lot of stuff. Even when she, you know, wasn't using the slow, she could keep up with you with her mobility and then get the one shot, etc., etc. So she had a lot of stuff in her kit, and they were really supposed to like kind of mesh together, but unfortunately she had them like spread out in different places where she kind of minimized her weaknesses because of them. And I think that was really a problem with Soj, right? But you know, that made her really versatile. She slotted into every comp. You could play her anywhere, any map, did not matter. Soj was going to be really good. Soj has been kind of reworked. No more one shot, no more slow, more damage in this weapon, which is much, you know, worse than her railgun, right? Less lethality to this character. But her versatility didn't really go anywhere. And I think that is kind of like a really important factor, right? Because I think that Brig lost a lot of playstyles because of the sustain nerfs and like her not being able to survive as much, her not having as much help with her team. She couldn't really play the front line nearly as much or as often anymore. But Soj, I don't think, has really suffered that. She just kind of does a little bit of less damage, right? So I kind of wanted to bring that up because I think that kind of proves that she's, you know, of course she had a couple mechanics removed, but I think she kind of escapes the kit bloat allegations, because even through all of her changes, she's a much healthier spot, but her playstyle has remained the same. I think it's a tentpole of a good initial design, something that you can work with. And yes, I think she was a little overtuned, but Soj is definitely now in a spot where she is not frustrating. She's pretty good. You can play her in a lot of different places. And she's a little more simple now, a little more consistent DPS focused, higher mobility, but not as much, you know, one-shot potential. But she plays very similar. And I think that is a very good thing, and that's something you need to keep in mind, right? Because even if she has a lot of good abilities, you really have to focus on, like, what are the things that really matter, right? What are the mechanics that really cause the problems, right? And I think they've really fixed that with Sojourn. And although I was initially pretty critical of Soj, the new changes they've made, I've really come around to them. I think that it really shows her design. So that is a character that has escaped the kit bloat. But there is another one who has not, probably the one you've been thinking about this entire video. Let's talk about Kiriko, because I want to get her out of the way before we talk about the tanks, because we are going to talk about Hazard. Kiri is a much different story because she has a lot of stuff, just a lot of stuff, right? She has super high mobility, super high burst potential. She has really good healing. She has very good escape, which is a self cleanse, which is something that's really important. She has Suzu, which is a cleanse for a bunch of people. Not only cleanse, but it's invulnerability. You can't touch anyone in it. You go right through them. You can't damage them. It cleanses everything. It wakes them up off the ground. It used to wake them up off the ground. That's kind of a relatively new change. She has an ultimate ability that lets you have let you fire faster and your cooldowns come back. She has so much stuff. But unlike Soj, who has less clear weaknesses, she has like minor weaknesses, I think. Kiri actually does have a couple of like pretty exploitable weaknesses. Her TP, yes, it goes through walls, which is a total other thing, but it actually, is determined by allies, right? Like you have to go to an ally. It's limited in that regard. You don't have full control over your TP, although it is pretty instant. That is one thing. Kiri also is a single target healer who can get really stuck not actually doing damage, not being able to effectively use everything in her kit effectively. That is another problem with Kiri, that if you force hard sustain, she's going to put way too many of her resources into healing, and it's not going to be as good. Now, there were times where that was good. Kiri just heal botted and got the ult, but not as much anymore. Also, now she has less health, and I think that's really important to know as well, just because of her high mobility. It's higher risk, easier to catch out, especially if she does a bad TP or if you can follow her, right? TP is on a 7-second cooldown, sure, but in that time, she's very, very vulnerable, right? The only thing I can't defend is Suzu, because Suzu does, again, it literally does everything. Healing and cleansing and everything, like there's nothing wrong with it. And I think the problem with Kiri is that so many of her abilities, she does everything at once. Right? That is really where the bloat comes in. Suzu has so many things on top of it. It literally does everything. And in most situations, they're very helpful, right? The invulnerability, the cleanse, and the heal, 9 times out of 10, the person you're Suzuing is going to benefit from all 3 of those in some form or fashion. There's no decision making. There's nothing there. That's why Suzu is annoying. That's why people don't like Suzu, right? I think, give or take, the TP is annoying, sure, but I think it has weaknesses. It's the Suzu that is really, really the big problem here, right? So I wanted to point that out because Kiri does have weaknesses, but the problem is that the strengths of her kit overtake them too much, right? So in that regard, I think that we really need to talk, you really have to think about like, how do we make her weaknesses more exploitable and allow her to have that kind of ability? Or is it more fun to make, Suzu do less stuff and keep her in this form, make her, it would make her squishy, it would make her not as viable, stuff like that. I think that is a big conversation to be had. Oh, and of course, Kitsune makes it more potent, which is already a problem with itself too, because it comes back faster. But yeah, Kiriko is like the classic Overwatch 2 example that they haven't quite figured out yet, and I wanted to kind of make that stark chain or distinction between Sojourn, who has like a really good goal in mind, but in Kiriko, who has so much loaded into one ability that I think it's going to be hard to put them into her other abilities, because her other abilities also have a lot of stuff going for them. That is a really difficult challenge to have, and I do think that Kiri does have too many things, right? So, Brig nowadays, I think she's totally fine. No bloat. Kiri or Soj nowadays, also no bloat, but Kiri definitely is still kind of suffering from that. Now, of course, difference as well with launch Brig and Kiri is ease of use. Brig was so easy, she did everything all at once, and it wasn't tied to any skill shots, right? If Kiriko wants to do damage, she's got to have the aim, right? Suzu is on it's on a long cooldown. I know it's not as long as you think it should be, but it's on a long cooldown. You could really mess up Suzu, and since there's so much power in it, you could lose really effectively, right? Brig, not so much. Brig or launch Brig, right? She's got multiple CC abilities that if you mess up one, you could help with the other one. She's got the combos and the burst after that too. So I think there is something to work with Kiriko. That's why I don't think she's super egregious, and I think this character is fun They just need to figure out something with Suzu. Either make it so that it does less stuff, it's a little more conditional when you get all the good stuff, or it does something else. And I think that's the ironic thing with Kit Bloat, is that if it did something else, but in a separate situation where, Suzu maybe makes you fire faster for 4 seconds, if you're using it on yourself, not on allies, then you're incentivized to use it for yourself and waste its maximum potential to try to, maximize what you're doing at that moment. So even if you might be able to add more stuff to characters to make them more interesting and actually make them not as frustrating in that regard. So I think there's something else that you can do there, and I do think that Kiriko is salvageable. But yeah, those are the non-tank characters. Let's go into the tank category because it's going to be a little different, right? Because tanks nowadays do a lot. They have damage reduction built in, they have knockback reduction built in, all of that stuff. Tanks are designed now in Overwatch 2 to be a little more jack of all trades, to be able to be used into many other tanks, into many other compositions. So as we go through with this, we are going to talk about characters that do a lot, especially the new Overwatch 2 characters, some of them that work and some of them that don't. And there will be a character in here that I don't think anyone would say is bloated, but I'm going to argue has some of the factors of bloat, but they just don't show because the design is so good. So that guy is not Ramattra. Let's start with Ramattra, right? Ramattra has a lot of abilities. Now, I wouldn't say that he's like the most in the forefront of this conversation either, but when you really go down to it, he has a lot of good stuff, right? He has good close and long range damage because of Nemesis mode. He has good poke potential and brawl potential, really good survivability. In Nemesis, that is really something. Being able to do damage while you're surviving, punch, block, punch, block, punch, block. And of course, with his ultimate as well, which is AoE, easier value on top of that. He also has a slow, and it is not the most, it's not the best in the game, but it is a very important tool. And it doesn't feel like the worst CC in the game, but it does do a lot for Ramattra. And of course, he also has a shield. He has good mitigation for his team. But the thing about Ramattra, I think that specifically about it, is that all of these abilities, they aren't as powerful. The slow is good, but it is not as powerful as many other CCs in the game. The shield is good, but it's very limited and it's not up very often. When you're in Nemesis, or if you're in Omnic mode, you have good range. When you're in Nemesis, you don't. You do have a speed boost, but you don't. You have to give up something to be in Nemesis mode. I think the problem with Ram is just in that survivability, right? I think it really shows when he is allowed to just do this and survive and get behind it and block and use his shield and then block and do damage and block and run you down, right? Then you hit your ult and you're still in the fight. Ramattra has an insane amount of uptime. So even though these pieces are not broken by themselves, when you keep cycling, allow him to stay in the fights longer and longer and longer, his uptime gets way higher and they start to kind of compound on each other a lot, right? So I think Ramattra's biggest flaw is that so much of his power also is in Nemesis mode that he feels frustrating, and in Nemesis he feels like he does too much, but in Omnic mode he doesn't feel like he does enough. So I think this is a character who does have a lot in his kit, but if you were able to shift the power a little bit into Omnic mode, away from that sustain and maybe not allow him to have it uptime so much, this is a character that isn't as frustrating, I think, in particular. Now, of course, Nemesis or his ult is its own thing, but I think Ramattra has something to work with here. And he's a lot of stuff. He is the weak abilities, right? He's got a lot of stuff, but they're weak, right? And they're spread out. And the reason it's frustrating is because he draws the fight on. So let's go to the opposite idea. Mauga is a character who has extreme weaknesses. Range, body size, hitbox size. He takes a lot of damage. He's very susceptible to anti-nades and knockback and everything. So what did they do? They overloaded all of his abilities. Now, his cardiac has been changed a little bit, but, you know, when you start listing the things that his abilities do, his run gives him movement speed. It makes him unstoppable. It gives him damage reduction. He has a crit on it where he does 1,000,000 damage, stacking that on top of the overhealth he gets from it, right? So that's one ability that does like 4 different mechanics for Mauga. Then you go to cardiac, also damage reduction, lifesteal for himself, lifesteal and damage reduction for his allies, and just massive damage with his chain guns, of course, right? And overhealth happening during that as well. So Mauga is a case where he has extreme weaknesses, but his abilities have been just overloaded to let him keep up with the meta. I mean, we're in a Mauga meta where he is going 15% faster, and his jump is on, or his stomp is on a 5-second cooldown, down from 6. And then his ult, of course, also is like a CC and a mitigation tool, and it's just the best combo ult in the game, basically. Mauga is a much different story, where his weaknesses are clear, but they're too exploitable, right? If he didn't have all this stuff, Mauga would fall over and die and be basically worthless. So in this regard, yes, I think Mauga's kit is bloated, but what does he do without it, right? There would have to be a complete reworking of this character. So I think this is a failure in design, but it's kind of like a now I'm arguing this as like, you want all characters to be relatively viable. Of course, Mauga is a frustrating one, as we all know, especially in a Mauga meta, but if you want all characters to be semi-viable, he does need a couple of these things, right? He's going to need extra flair on his abilities in order to make him function without scaling him down or completely changing how his overhealth or miniguns work, right? And that's a really tall order. So the reason, like, he has too much stuff in each individual ability, unlike Ramattra, who has kind of spread it out against his whole kit. They both have a lot of stuff. They're both bloated per se, but you feel Mauga's way more because it's much more in your face. And again, it's all happening at the same time. There is nothing he has to give up to do it. And I think that's a really big point that I'm trying to come across, where Kiriko and Mauga are really frustrating, but Ramattra isn't so much, and Soj isn't so much anymore. That is where the problems really lie. You can talk about weaknesses and distribution and all of that, but is at the exact same time, can he get all the value out of everything, especially for free, for easy, right? That's really what we're going at here. I'm going to bring up one more character before we talk about Hazard, one that I've been hinting at that I think would fall under the bloated category. It's Junker Queen. I love Junker Queen. I think she is the best designed Overwatch 2 tank. It is so fun. I love this character so much. But when you really look at her kit, she has a lot of stuff. She has the bleed, which is a damage over time and a self-heal. She has the shout, which gives her and her allies overhealth and a speed boost, right? She has the knife, which is a knockback ability, right? It does knock it knocks in like it's a pull, but it is still a knockback ability that also applies the bleed. You have the axe, which applies the bleed and also has a unique mechanic where it comes back faster if you hit multiple people. And then of course you have the ult, which is an anti for this character, right? So that's so many things that this character has, but nobody would call this character bloated. Why is that? Well, it's because, one, I think a lot of them have been scaled back. Of course, Junker Queen in the beta did a lot of damage, or sorry, a lot of overhealth with her shout. That was just too much for this character. But also, sure, her clear weaknesses are exploitable, and she doesn't always use all the abilities that she has for the max value. Like, we'll talk about, you know, the knife, right? The knife can be used as really good close range, you know, burst, right? So I'm here, I'm doing my combo, I hit him, blah, blah, whatever. But also, what if there's somebody on a high ground here that I need to get off? So I'm actually I miss, but let's say I grab them, I pull them off. Now I don't have my knife and I'm kind of giving up a little bit of my burst damage mid-fight, and I have to go for my riskier tool like this. if I really want to go. Now, if I go for my risky tool, that's more sustain for me, right? So you're making choices about when and where to use them. This character has a lot of stuff, but Shout, which has a lot of the mechanics on it, a lot of the ability, is on a long cooldown. And her axe, this is a risky move. It takes a lot out of it. Knife is a very important thing in her kit, even though it's on a short cooldown. If you misuse it, that could make or break a fight. And then, of course, she has the anti-nade on her ult, which honestly is maybe a little strong, maybe a little too strong. I'm not a fan of anti-nades anymore in general. But also with this character is that she's actually really good into multiple comps, right? Queen can play into dive comps because she's got the good disruption to keep the tank from going away. She's, she's basically stopping the mobile characters, right? She can play into brawl because she has really good space, like really good cleave with her axe and stuff like that. She can play into spam in some regards because she can pull people with the knife and she can use the speed to close the distance a little better, right? But again, this character isn't bloated because there's so much nuance to how you use these things. You can't get all the value at once, right? You use your shout in one way, like to close the distance. You don't have it when you get there, right? That is why Queen, I think, gets to escape this stuff. But on paper, she has so many things, right? So, after all, out of all that, right? I think it's kind of clear that a character with a lot of stuff, with a bloated kit, is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It just has to be used in an effective way, right? It needs to be used in a way where you can't do everything at once. You're kind of giving up stuff. Make sure your weaknesses are clear and defined, even though you have all of these things, right? It's easy to track when Queen is susceptible. It's easy to track when Soj is susceptible because she doesn't have her jump, right? That is, I think, really, really important for this conversation. So, with that being said, it's time to talk about Hazard. All right, so Hazard, right? This is the guy we really got to talk about, right? Is he bloated? Well, let's talk about the things that he has, right? So he has the leap. It's on a very short cooldown. It has a lot of burst damage with it. It has a knockback on it, right? He has a wall climb, which he can go with the movement of it. So he's got really good movement. He's got a passive that other characters have, right? Then he has the wall, which is a projectile, the wall that knocks back when you hit it, the wall that is a wall, can block off chokes. The wall is, May wall, any kind of wall, one of the, if not the most versatile abilities in the game. And it has so much more stuff associated with it. Then he has the block, which is damage reduction, but it also does damage if you're close to him, and it's on a resource meter, so it's up very, very often, okay? And he has armor, which I haven't really talked about armor, but like that is a mechanic. That is something that, tanks have. Then he has the ult, which is a root, which is a CC ability, and it does damage. And it goes through walls. Like it has all this extra stuff on it. Hazard definitely has the most out of all characters in the game, I think. Just so many things in this character. But is he bloated? In a way that is negative. From the time that I played him, I don't believe so. The reason being is that even though he has so much stuff, none of them are the best iterations of them, right? Or they have weaknesses. They have things about them. His wall is smaller than May's. It has less health. It's easy to break. It's easy to play around. His jump, he doesn't go very fast. He doesn't go very far. That is a really important tool for like a dive tank character like this, or a character with mobility, right? His block is pretty short range for the for the damage. I will say maybe a little too much damage reduction, but you are giving up a lot of stuff while you are blocking, right? Oh, I didn't even talk about it in his jump. You also can just use a bunch of abilities, which is super unique too. His ult, actually, I don't find to be very powerful as well, because the root, you're allowed to do whatever you want when you're just not move or use movement abilities, but you can still like turn around and shoot back. And it's not very long. And even though it goes through walls, like, it doesn't do too much damage, I don't think, overall. Like, it has a lot. It's not like the strongest thing ever, right? So even with all this stuff, it has, they all have weaknesses, right? And with all these things, like, wall is very versatile. You can use it in many different ways, but you can't use them all at once, right? Jump, it's it's a movement ability, like a Winston thing. That's a classic example of an ability that is really interesting and engaging because there's so many ways that you can use it, right? The block, again, it's on a resource. It's up more often. I think that is debatable. And the ult, do you want to use it on characters that are, mobile to keep them down? That's riskier because they can get out of it and react to it. Or do you want to do it on characters that could run, like maybe probably wouldn't be able to run away with you, but you can confirm the kill? Again, you're making the call. You're trying to, you can't do everything at once, basically, just the way that these things work. So Hazard can play in many different types of comps. He can play on many different types of maps. He's not the best on any of them. He has very clear weaknesses, and he has to make decisions about when he uses his abilities. He can't do everything at once, and I think that is glaringly apparent, right? So, with that being said, I think Hazard is one of the best, is probably the best example of a character in Overwatch 2 that has a lot of things going for him, but not actually a lot of strength in those things. There is no problem that he has a lot of mechanics because the way that they are implemented allows him to just be exploited, for him to have a lot of options, but for them maybe not to always be the best thing ever at all times. You're not gonna be able to get all the value out of this character all at once. And I think that is really, really important to consider. So with this whole long-winded discussion, Kit Bloat is very overblown. Just as I say, like, the power creep is overblown, the problem with it, I think the problems with Kit Bloat are really, really overblown, because if they are implemented correctly, you could give a character every single mechanic in the game, but if you make it interesting enough and make sure the uptime isn't high and that you have to make choices about which ones you use, you can't do everything, then it doesn't matter. All that matters is the character is fun, they have a good game plan, not frustrating to fight against. And it doesn't matter, like, there are characters that have no mechanics, like Widow, who's extremely frustrating to fight against. And then there's a character like Hazard, who's got everything on the book, but I don't care. You know what I mean? I never felt like it was unfair that I died to Hazard, or that it was too easy, whatever Hazard was doing, to kill me, right? Again, nothing has ever reached launched Brig. That's just a fact. Like, nothing has ever reached what it felt like to play against launch Brig, because they've learned their lesson. They've learned not to overload a character in the ways that they overloaded her. There are characters that have a lot of things, but I don't think it really matters. So, in conclusion, Kit Bloat, it's fine. Overwatch does not have a Kit Bloat problem on average, right? And even if there are characters who are, not as fun, it's not really the reason. Like, there are characters that are frustrating, and it's not because they can do everything, right? That is kind of part of what I'm getting at here. So, with that all out of the way, please, first off, subscribe to the channel if you like this. But second off, let me know in the comments, what do you think? Am I off? Have I missed any characters? I didn't really talk about any Overwatch 1 characters. I was thinking about Echo, characters like that. I was thinking about Juno, but I decided against it. And what do you think about Hazard? Do you think it's overblown? Do you think he's fair? Do you think he's like super good, super bad? I do want to hear about it. He will go live soon. Like the video while you're at it. And this was streamed live, twitch.tv/Lane Hemingway. That's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. If you want to get in on these discussions live, that's the best place to do it, as always. And of course, please join my Discord down below if you want to keep up to date with things that are going on with me and the projects I'm working on. That's the best place to do it. Talk to some people in there as well. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. Please have a good day.